May we learn together in hope and joy. Please be seated. Those were some lengthy readings, at least our first reading and the gospel reading, pretty long. And so I'm not going to talk about the long ones. I'm going to talk about the short one tonight, but that doesn't mean that the sermon itself is going to be short. That's not how that works, generally speaking. But I was thinking this week about a phrase that I've heard many times, and you have surely heard many times, and that is that the end justifies the means. You've heard this before. Yes, the end justifies the means. And I'm not sure I agree with that most of the time. And in fact, most of the time when someone says, oh, well, the ends, they justify the means, it's precisely because they say that I start to wonder, I'm not so sure about this, because often they say that because the means are really kind of not good. And the ends they think are good, and you don't need me to explain that to you, of course. And it's not unlike the phrase, it's the thought that counts. It's the thought that counts never is preceded by something good, right? It's never like, oh, here is $1,000. Oh, it's the thought that counts. It's the, oh, I tried to wash your sweater, and now it'll fit only a 4-year-old because it shrank. It's the thought that counts, right? And actually, I want to look at that and say, no, it's the lack of thought that counts, because now you've ruined one of my, we won't get into that. I may have experienced that a time or two in my life. But I was thinking about the ends justifies the means, because I was thinking about the second reading from Paul's letter to the Ephesians. And it's going to take a little bit of work for us to get there and perhaps understand. So stick with me as we talk a little bit about history and culture. One of the things to appreciate is that the city of Ephesus at the time of Paul's writing was a grand city. It was a powerful city. It was a remarkable city in the Empire of Rome. It was home to one of the ancient wonders of the world, the Temple of Artemis. And so it was wealthy. It was powerful. The people that lived in Ephesus were proud that they lived in Ephesus, and they were people who were accustomed to be treated a certain way. If you happened to be traveling and you said you were from Ephesus, you expected that people would go, oh, you must be wealthy. You must be powerful. You must be influential. These were the kinds of people who were used to getting what they wanted. You know people like this, yes? That's one thing to appreciate. The other thing to appreciate about Ephesus, again, I mentioned that it is home to one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the Temple of Artemis. It was a place of great magical and today's language, occult practices. There were people that came from all over the world to worship at the Temple of Artemis and to engage in spiritual practices that we don't, frankly, know a whole lot about, because they were part of what are called mystery religions. And mystery religions are called mystery religions because they are a religion that relies on mystery. And so we don't know. But one of the artifacts that we have that is found all over the Roman world, all over the Greco-Roman world, but is found especially in the city of Ephesus, are what are called curse tablets. They are thin sheets of metal on which some priest, some prophetess, some special spiritual person has carved out something and sold that something might happen. Make sense? And so they're called curse tablets because more often than not, what people paid to have happen was something bad to someone they did not like. And that says something about, I think, human nature. But that wasn't always the case. Sometimes it was for good things, and they would bury them in the ground more often than not, or leave them in special places. And the reason that we have so many of them is precisely because they would bury them and they were preserved. So what in the world does all of that have to do with something for us to think about? Well, there's one more piece of information to fit this puzzle together, and that is that when Paul was writing this letter to the Ephesians, Paul was sitting in a Roman dungeon. He was in prison when he wrote this letter to the Ephesians. He was writing to this church in Ephesus filled with wealthy, influential, powerful people who cared a great deal about him and who knew that he was in prison. And so, I think quite naturally, if you were a politically connected, wealthy, influential, powerful person in the Roman Empire, and you heard that your friend was imprisoned by the Roman authorities, it would be quite natural, not particularly surprising, that you might want to try and do something for that person. Make sense? Of course you would want to do that, and some of the things might be on the up, and some of the things might not be so much on the up and up. We won't talk about the ethics of asking people to pull strings, but what is also very likely is that some of these people in Ephesus who were accustomed, when things were going poorly for someone they cared about, to go down the road and get a curse tablet, it's likely that some of the people in the church were doing that in the hopes that perhaps Artemis or Athena or someone might intercede on behalf of Paul. And I imagine that Paul heard about this, because that's the kind of thing that you tell a friend when they are in need. I'm doing everything I can. I'm offering, in today's parlance, my thoughts and prayers for you. Back then, Paul, we're doing all that we can for you, buddy. I even bought a curse tablet. Let's cross our fingers and hope that that might do something. And so Paul, in his letter to these folks, addresses this and says, take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness. That sentence, if we didn't have all of this context, probably might not make a whole lot of sense. But what I think it means, given this context, is you need to knock it off with the curse tablet. That is not the kind of thing that a Christian ought to be doing. If you're going to pray, pray to the one God. Don't go over and hedge your bets with these other pagan deities. Have no part in the unfruitful works of darkness. Why? Well, for one, they are unfruitful. That tablet, no matter who carves something into it or where you bury it, is not going to have any influence on whether I am in prison or out of prison. And part of me, as I've thought about this week, have thought to myself, well, of course, we get that. We don't believe that curses or voodoo dolls, right, where you stick a pin in them so that I feel like somebody's giving me a voodoo doll into my lower back today. That's neither here nor there. But of course we know, as modern people in 2026, that those things don't work. Except that sometimes I think that those kinds of things work. There are lots of things that are unexplainable. There are lots of things that seem to influence the universe. I wear a medal around my neck that was blessed by a bishop. And I like to think that if I wear it, things are going to go well for me. And when I drive and I don't have it on, I have a moment in which I think, oh shoot, I didn't put that on today. Does this medal protect me? I don't want to say no. say no. But you know what? I don't think there's anything wrong, provided we understand that it's not the medal that is doing anything for us. It is the prayers to God that this medal reminds us of, represents. It is God who is doing the thing, not some piece of metal. And so if I feel it, all right, do you want too much information? Too much information? Too much information? All right, we're going to vote. How many of you want too much information? I'm a man. I have chest hair, right? When you wear a medal around your neck, it yanks on it all the time. I can't forget that I'm wearing it because it hurts. And it makes me feel more pious every time a hair gets pulled out. Like, Jesus, this is what I do for you. But when I feel it, when I remember it, I pray. And that is a very good thing. And that, I think, is a categorically different thing than what these folks in Ephesus were doing. But then again, people do unfruitful things all the time. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but how many of us have knocked on wood before? I have. How many of us cross our fingers? How many of us have tossed a coin into a fountain? How many of us make a wish when we blow out candles? How many of us throw salt over our shoulder? Right? These are things that we do. Maybe you carried your bustling spouse. Bustling is not the right word. Some of you carried your spouse over the threshold, right? All of these things, therefore, good luck. Is there anything wrong with doing those things? No. This is not, I don't think, what Paul is talking about, provided we get it. That it's not some spirit of the threshold. It is not some lady of the fountain. The one who rules all things is the God whom we worship, who came to earth in Christ, who died and who rose. And so in sober moments we get that, yes? And yet, there is some kind of emotional pull to them. If I don't knock on wood, I feel a certain kind of way. Do I walk under a ladder? No. Do I avoid black cats? Yes. Because it has an influence on how I feel. And so it's not those things that I think we ought to think about when it comes to what Paul is saying, have no part in the unfruitful works of darkness. What I think we should think about are not the harmless little things that we do in life, but rather the harmful things that we do. And sometimes superstition can become harmful, because one of the things that superstitions can do is negate my personal responsibility for things. When I say the devil made me do it, what I'm really saying is it's not my fault. And not taking responsibility for things can be harmful. Yes? We've all experienced that. And so sometimes we use these superstitions or we use these ideas to push the blame on someone else. I've had children, and my children have all played soccer. And there's a thing that happens in soccer that drives me insane. And that is, coaches and players do the same thing. When they try to make a pass and it is wide of the mark, they say, "Oh, unlucky." Because sometimes in the game of soccer, luck plays into it. I saw a game in which a goalkeeper tried to dive and stop the ball. It got past him, but the defender was there to try to kick it away. And do you know what happened? It bumped the goalkeeper in the back and went in the goal. And that was a professional game. That we could look at and say, unlucky. You go up and you head the ball, and instead of going here, it goes a little, unlucky, unlucky, unlucky. But what drives me insane is when the child kicks, look at, my eldest was guilty of this all the time. They shoot the ball, and if you took a goal and you put it on top of the goal, it would still be over that one. And the coach says, oh, unlucky. That's not unlucky. That's bad technique. That's a bad choice. Sometimes we use these words so that we don't take responsibility. And when we don't take responsibility, all kinds of problems. And in soccer, the one that I wish is that they would learn to stop doing silly things. Because when you say unlucky, it's just luck, not that you made the wrong decision. There are lots of other things, but this is already getting long. I think, though, at the heart of the idea is this, that we grab onto superstitions because sometimes we want to feel in control in a world and in a life that really doesn't afford us a whole lot of control. And I'm not convinced, this would be a whole other sermon in and of itself, that if we had the kind of control that we would like over life, that things would go all that much better for us. Because I'm not sure I would make all of the good and wise and healthy decisions that I should. But we think that that control will keep us safe. We think that having control will provide us with security, and that is a questionable assertion. But what Paul says will give us security is understanding that we are children of the light, that we are God's children. That status, that reality is far better than any coin or salt shaker or knuckle can accomplish. And so maybe that's where we should end tonight, with an appreciation that we are indeed children of the light. You are light, Paul says, and that makes you beautiful. That makes you capable. That makes you held in God's hand. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.